Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Von Manor, where Roger and I have returned for the very first episode of Roger's Random Book Show. It's the very first episode of this new fantastic series. So, for a while, I was doing Book of the Week. Where I would talk about just some random book that was lying around here at the manor. But Roger said, that's just not epic enough. We need to make it bigger. We need to make that bigger. So I said, okay, Roger, you're the boss. We'll do a whole show of just random books that are lying around here at the manor. Roger chooses these books that we will talk about. So this fantastic program is just me talking about some random books that are just kind of lying around, and I'll talk about them. Doesn't that sound like fun? There's no better show anywhere. Trust me. So yes, let's talk about some random books. So I've got some random books to talk about. And we're going to start with Andrew Vachss, some books by Andrew Vachss. So I talked about Andrew Vachss recently. I did a video about Andrew Vachss's Burke series, which was a series of crime novels that began in the 1980s. 1986? 85 or 86 is when the first one came out? I guess I'll check. And it ran for a long, long time. And it was a series of crime novels about Burke, who is a criminal, who associates with criminals. And he's basically a shady character for hire. If you want to hire a shady character, you hire Burke. And it was an excellent series of crime novels. And so I did this video where I was talking about these books and talking about how I wanted to read them again, because I read these as they were coming out through the 80s and 90s and 2000s and haven't read any of them really since. So I thought I would go looking for my copies of the Burke novels, the paperbacks. And I can't find any of the paperbacks. And this is disturbing to me, Roger. I don't know if you, as bookish people, have ever had this experience where you have a book and you just can't find it. In this case, several books that I just can't find. And that's particularly distressing with Flood, the first book. Because I love that mass market paperback of Flood. I think it's fantastic. That's how I first read the book. But those aren't the only copies of these novels that I have. So I was going to start with rereading the novels from the 1980s. I think those are the best ones from what I remember. Those first four Burke novels. But that opinion might change as I read them. But I have the hardcovers. I made a point, because I liked this series so much, of buying the original hardcovers when I found them. And I bought them and stashed them away. And because I stashed them away, they're still in pretty good shape. These are not the copies of these books that I actually read. I actually read paperbacks, I think, for most of these. And the first book that I'll be showing you today is this one. This is Flood, Andrew Vachss' Flood. So this is the very first Burke novel. And let me remind myself when this actually came out. Was it 86? It was 1985. It was 1985 when this came out. And so this is the original first edition of Flood by Andrew Vachss, featuring Burke, who is oddly portrayed as kind of a throwback, old school Private Eye. And so they went with a very retro look for this first paperback. This first hardcover, for this first hardcover. And the cover was done by who? Jacket designed by John Sposato. So I guess he did the artwork for this. And this is probably my least favorite Burke cover. It just seems odd. It's odd for this character to be dressed like this, because this is not how I pictured Burke. Burke lives in the 1980s. He is from 1985. And so he would not dress like he was from 1945. But who knows? We've got this cover for Flood. And still in wonderful shape, this hardcover. So this is the very first Andrew Vachss Burke novel. It's excellent. It's probably not as good as some of the later Burke novels that came right after. The ones that came after this, I think, had a more streamlined pace, and I think he got better. But this was an excellent book. So Flood by Andrew Vachss. This is the very first one and the first book that we'll be showing here on Roger's Random Book Show. So this was followed up by Strega, which is a beautiful cover. I love this. So this is the hardcover for Strega, first edition hardcover. The sequel to Flood, the second Burke novel. I just love this cover. I think it's beautiful. Who did the cover? So jacket illustration by John Jinks, jacket design by John Volk. And there's Andrew Vachss there. That's his good side that he's showing you. And so this was a really good book. And on the back, it has praise for his previous novel, Flood. No blurbs for this one because it was a hardcover, and I guess they didn't send out any advanced copies for people to gush over. But it was a really good book. And if I'm remembering right, I thought Strega was a better crime novel than Flood was. And this is probably my personal favorite out of the covers. I just think it's fantastic, Strega. So that was the second book. And when did this come out? I should probably check that. This came out in 1987. So 1987. And then the third book is probably my favorite from the 1980s. And it has a very 1980s cover. So this is Bluebell by Andrew Vachss. And they hit upon a formula here, which they followed for a long time with Vachss, where they would have the femme fatale on the cover. And this just feels very 80s to me. This feels like a very 80s hardcover. This one came out in probably 88. Yeah, 88. And it's lovely. And it has some praise on the back because they did send out advanced copies for this one. And I'm going to read one because it sums up these novels very well. This is from David Morrell. David Morrell, a great thriller writer who created Rambo. He's probably best known for creating Rambo, who became the Rambo from the films. But he wrote First Blood. And he also wrote the novelizations for Rambo 2 and 3. So, he didn't want anybody else to be writing Rambo. And he also wrote a bunch of other really good books. And so David Morrell is actually an author that we will be talking about here on this very program in the future. But he said this about Vachss. He ranks among the most gripping and original thriller writers. Andrew Vachss is on my list of must-read authors. I lunge for any new book by him. His previous novels, Flood and Strega, are masterpieces. Perfect combinations of taut prose, compelling action, relentless pace, and heart-wrenching themes. Their main character, a highly moral outlaw named Burke, is stunningly unique. Now Vachss is back, and so is Burke in Bluebell. At once a poignant love story and a harrowing odyssey through the underside of New York. Bluebell bursts into motion with 5 rocket-speed words and never lets up till the impact of its startling last page. Now that right there is a blurb. That's a blurb. So yeah, and Bluebell is fantastic. And like I said, probably my favorite Burke novel, actually. But like I said, I'm going to read them again, and I'll give a revised estimate. That was followed by Hard Candy in 1989, which has this cover. So they latched onto the formula with that previous cover, and they're going to continue that for a while with the femme fatale on the cover, Hard Candy. Now this one does not have any praise on the back, but it does have a badass photograph of the author. Andrew Vachss pretty much always looked like a badass on his book covers. And that's him right there with his cool pirate look going on. He was cool, this guy. And I don't remember much about this book, though. I remember I liked it. But as for the plot and everything, I'm like, I think I might be getting it mixed up with some other books because I read so many of these that it's kind of hard to remember. It's hard to remember 1989. That was the year I graduated high school. It was a while ago. You know, it's been a little bit. So Hard Candy, I do remember it being pretty good. And those are the Andrew Vachss novels from the 1980s, the first books that I'm here to talk about on this fantastic show. But we're going to continue with the final frontier because we're going to be talking about some Star Trek books, actually. So in my neighborhood, the neighborhood here of the manor, not too far, a couple blocks up, I always walk my dogs by a little free library that's a couple blocks up. And there is never anything good in this little free library. It's always full of like books on yoga and barbecue and cookbooks and self-help. Yeah, the kind of things I would never read ever. But every once in a while, somebody will put something good in here. And I don't know if somebody died or what, but one day this little free library was full of Star Trek books. It was full of Star Trek books, and most of them I already had. But there were 3 of them that I did not have. And they were 3 of them that I was absolutely thrilled to get because they were adaptations of the original Star Trek episodes by James Blish. And so James Blish wrote this whole series of books where he adapted episodes of Star Trek. And this series went on for years. Like, this is the very first one. And he adapted, 7 episodes? So there were 7 episodes in this really thin book. So he basically turned each episode of Star Trek into short stories, little short stories. And they're tremendous fun. They're very entertaining. And for a long time, back in the olden days before there were VCRs, this is the only way you could experience Star Trek, especially once the show was canceled and you could only watch it on reruns. If you weren't watching at that particular time when the show was rerun, you got no Star Trek. So this is a way you can experience those books. And so they were very popular. This series ran 12 books, I think, 11 or 12, and eventually he adapted every single episode. And I have all of those books, but in 1991, to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Star Trek, all of these were reprinted in these fat mass market paperbacks, and these were all just sitting there in the little free library along with a bunch of other Star Trek novels. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, all 3 of them were there. And that's fantastic. So every fat paperback is a season of the original series of Star Trek. And so this is the classic episodes 1, which has first season episodes by James Blish and J.A. Lawrence. That was his wife, right? His wife wrote some of the Star Trek episodes and for the books. And so this is every single story from the first season. So it's basically a novelization of an entire season of television, which is really interesting. These original books didn't release the stories or publish the stories in any kind of order, really. It was kind of random. So here you have them, I think, in the order that the shows were produced. Not aired, but produced. And it's really, really cool. So this is the first season. And one cool thing about this is before every story, it has who wrote it, the director, and a little black and white picture of the episode. It's like, here's Balance of Terror, one of the greatest Star Trek episodes ever. So this is just really cool. And Book Trek is coming up. I'm very tempted to read this, but it's just so long. I might not be able to restrain myself, though. So this is like 646 pages, an entire season of Star Trek. That's followed by the second season, of Star Trek and the third season of Star Trek. I mean, this is just awesome. This is probably not anybody's favorite season, but there were some good episodes, you know. These are cool. And so I just had to say, look at this. Look what I found. I found these a few weeks ago in that little free library. And since then, all of the Star Trek books have vanished. So somebody besides me must like Star Trek books. Because I tell you, a lot of those self-help books are just sitting there in that little free library forever. Because nobody wants to read those, frankly. So that's that. And I have to talk about some comics stuff. Because everybody loves it when I talk comics. And one of the greatest comic books that was ever produced by anybody was produced by Marvel Comics back in the 1970s. And I did a whole episode about this series of Epic Comic Book Wednesday, and that is Tomb of Dracula. Tomb of Dracula. Most of those issues were written by Marv Wolfman. All of the art on the regular series issues was done by Gene Colan. And it was a magnificent series. And I have an omnibus volume of that first 30 issues of Tomb of Dracula. I've got them all electronically, but I also have these, which are essential volumes from Marvel's old Essential line. And this has the entire Tomb of Dracula series. And I had forgotten, because I stumbled on these by accident as I was going through some old boxes that I hadn't gone through forever. And I'd forgotten that I had bought extra essentials of Tomb of Dracula, Frankenstein, and Werewolf by Night. I bought extras. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe I was worried that some would get caught in a fire or something. Who knows? But I did get extras. And I got rid of some of my other editions. So fortunately, I still have the entire series here of Tomb of Dracula. And this is from the old Essentials line. So this is a line that they did before they ever started doing Marvel Epic Collections. And they were all really cheaply produced in black and white. Just really cheap black and white pages. And I think if there's any comic book in the world that originally was a color comic book that might look better as a black and white comic book, it's probably Dracula. It's probably Tomb of Dracula. And this is just such a magnificent series. And I've been intending on revisiting it, but I'm just reading so many other things right now. But eventually I will, because Gene Colan did just such a beautiful job on Tomb of Dracula. And so these essential volumes reprinted all of the original issues of Tomb of Dracula. But when Tomb of Dracula was canceled with issue number, was it 70? I think it was 70. It was continued in a black and white magazine called Tomb of Dracula. And at the same time that the original color series was being printed, there was also another black and white magazine called Dracula Lives. So there's a lot of Dracula material out there. This is the cover for the magazine version of Tomb of Dracula, which came out right around that time that the Frank Langella movie came out. Remember that one? I like that movie, actually. And so Gene Colan was able to go right back to drawing Dracula. And he did just a magnificent, did magnificent artwork for this series. He just continued right along doing awesome stuff for Dracula. Unfortunately, this series didn't last too long, the black and white Tomb of Dracula. I think it only lasted 6 issues or something. And a lot of the stories are printed in this last volume from that, as well as the stories from Dracula Lives. So, you know, you just get so much cool stuff in these old essential volumes. It would be nice if all of this stuff would be reprinted in oversized volumes. But I'm actually really happy to have these because, like I said, black and white just suits Dracula so well. So there you go. Had to throw some comics in here. So there I did it. I threw some comics. Tomb of Dracula. This is great. Just a great series. Highly recommended. And these old Essential volumes, they were fun. I kind of missed these, but you know, the epics are better. So there you go. I think, what am I at? 20 minutes? I'll shut up now. But catch future episodes of Roger's Random Book Show. We'll be talking about many different authors. Robert E. Howard, H.P. Lovecraft, David Morrell, as we mentioned earlier. Just all kinds of cool stuff. I'll try to do one of these a week. What do you think, Roger? Can we pull it off? We'll see. If it gets good reception, you know, if people like it. But of course they will, because it's the greatest show that's ever been aired anywhere, I think. So there you go. I'll catch you next time.